In every small town, there's always that one person you trust without hesitation. The figure of authority everyone looks up to. They're the ones you believe will always do what's right. The ones who protect and guide the community. But what happens when that trust is shattered? What happens when the person you trust most becomes something you never imagined? Someone capable of the unthinkable. In this seemingly peaceful town, life flowed as it always had. Children ran through the streets. Neighbors exchanged friendly waves, and everything appeared calm. But beneath the surface of daily routines, something insidious was unfolding. Something that would shake the very foundation of the community, leaving it in disbelief. What do you do when the person everyone turns to for protection is hiding a dark secret? At first, everything appeared normal. Clayton Marshall was a sheriff, a devoted father, and a husband. He seemed to have it all. His life was the very picture of stability. Sharon, his wife, stood by him, and their two daughters, including the younger Ella, looked up to him as their hero. To everyone in town, Clayton was a man of integrity, trusted by neighbors, respected by his colleagues, and adored by his family. Ella, the youngest, idolized her father. To her, he was more than just a sheriff. He was her rock, her constant. They shared a deep bond that seemed unbreakable. Then there was Monique Ellis, Clayton's second daughter's best friend. Monique had spent so much time at the Marshall household that she was almost like family. The two girls had grown up together, inseparable through childhood and adolescence. They didn't just share a friendship, they shared a history, one woven with memories of childhood games, late-night study sessions, and moments of laughter. Monique wasn't just Ella's best friend, though. She was the daughter of Officer Jerome Ellis, Clayton's longtime deputy and close friend. Clayton and Jerome's bond went beyond their professional ties. They had been through thick and thin together, celebrated holidays as families, and stood by each other in times of joy and hardship. Their families intertwined in a way that made them inseparable. Like a second home for Monique, the Marshall house was always open to her. Clayton had known Monique since she was a baby. He had been there the day she was born, holding her in his arms and promising her father, Jerome, that he would always look after her. Years passed, but that promise remained. Neighborhood barbecues, family vacations, and holidays, Monique was a constant presence. She grew up alongside Clayton's children, and their families shared a bond that seemed unbreakable. But as time went on, the line between protector and something much darker began to blur. What started as innocent moments, conversations that would have seemed harmless in another time, gradually shifted into something far more sinister. The closeness that was once innocent became uncomfortable, private moments that felt more intimate than they should. It was as if the trust that had built the foundation of Clayton's family and his relationship with Monique had cracked. A quiet, familiar town, once filled with laughter and the innocence of childhood friendships, suddenly found itself confronting a nightmare no one had expected. The trust that had been so easily given was now a broken illusion. What happens when the person everyone believed would never betray them becomes the source of a deep, unimaginable betrayal? In this town, the line between right and wrong had been crossed, and there was no going back. As the community began to uncover the shocking truth, they were forced to reckon with the devastating realization that the man they trusted most, the one who had sworn to protect them, was capable of the most horrific actions. How do you rebuild trust when the very person entrusted with its protection has destroyed it? Sheriff Clayton Marshall, a man once revered for his integrity, was now at the center of a tragedy that no one saw coming. This once respected figure, whose life seemed perfect to the outside world, had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. In a town built on trust, the revelation of his actions left everyone questioning everything they thought they knew. What do you do when the person you trusted most becomes someone you never imagined? The line between protector and predator had been crossed, and now the town would never be the same. For Monique, Clayton Marshall was more than just Ella's father. He was a second father figure in her life. He was someone she could trust completely without question. Growing up, she never thought twice about being in his presence. whether it was at family gatherings, in his home, or even when she passed by his office after school. Clayton was a constant, a familiar face in the background of her childhood. But now, at 17, everything had changed, and Monique was no longer the little girl Clayton once carried on his shoulders. She was stepping into adulthood, her eyes set on bigger dreams, fueled by ambition and a desire to make something of herself. And Monique was driven. She knew exactly what she wanted. Her goal was clear: to wear a badge of her own one day. She dreamed of joining one of the top security agencies in the country, maybe the FBI, maybe the Secret Service. She was focused, her ambition lighting up the room whenever she talked about her future. But the bond that once connected her to Clayton and his family through friendship and shared moments was now beginning to shift in a way neither of them could have predicted. The line between the trusted family friend and something else was about to blur, and they had no idea it was coming. In recent months, Clayton had seen Monique more often. She wasn't just Ella's best friend anymore. She was becoming someone he crossed paths with regularly. And Monique was always around. At the Marshall household almost every weekend, at family parties, school events, and occasionally she'd stop by the sheriff's office to meet her father, Jerome Ellis. She would wait in the lobby or wander through the halls of the station, always lingering in the background of Clayton's life. Their interactions, once casual and innocent, were now becoming more frequent, and with each passing day, their lives became a little more entangled. It was a normal day, a day that should have slipped by without anything unusual happening. But some moments, no matter how routine they seem, have a way of changing everything. This day would be one of them. And Monique hadn't planned on staying long at the sheriff's station. She had simply stopped by to meet her father, hoping for a quick hello and maybe a ride home. It was something she had done countless times before. She'd wait in the familiar halls of the station, surrounded by the usual hum of conversations and the occasional ring of phones. It was ordinary, uneventful. But on this particular afternoon, something in the air felt different, charged with a tension that had been missing before. Clayton noticed her as soon as she entered the station. He spotted her through his office window, her presence catching his eye in a way it never had before. She wasn't the same girl he remembered. The shy, awkward child he had watched grow up had been replaced by the unmistakable presence of a young woman. Confident, graceful, with a poise that caught him off guard. There was something in the way she moved now, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. It wasn't like him to notice those details, and yet, there he was, observing her with a lingering attention he couldn't explain. He tried to dismiss the thought. It was nothing, he told himself, just an observation. But that thought didn't leave him. It stayed with him, gnawing at the edges of his mind. Clayton knew Monique well. He had watched her grow up, celebrated her childhood achievements alongside his own daughters, and spent countless hours with her and her family. But today, for some reason, something was different. Something stirred inside him that he couldn't quite ignore. He tried to brush it off. He knew Monique. She was like family. But the more he watched her, the harder it became to look away. The girl who had once played in his backyard, who had spent weekends at their house, was now someone entirely different. She wasn't just Monique from the backyard birthday parties anymore. She had become someone else, a young woman who Clayton found himself noticing in ways he shouldn't. The realization hit him like a sudden misstep, a jolt of guilt that whispered in his mind that this was wrong. But temptation, as it often does, crept in quietly, winding through the cracks in his disciplined mind. He tried to push it away, but it clung to him, persistent and unwelcome. When Monique made her way down the hall toward her father's desk, Clayton stepped out of his office almost instinctively. He knew Jerome was out on assignment, having sent him out himself earlier. There was no one else in the station who could meet with her, no one else to pass the time with her while she waited. And in that moment, Clayton saw an opportunity, a chance to prolong the encounter, to satisfy the curiosity he didn't want to admit he felt. Monique, Clayton called out, his voice casual, almost fatherly. Your dad's not back yet. Why don't you come wait in my office? There was nothing in his tone to suggest anything unusual, no reason for Monique to feel uncomfortable. She smiled easily, trusting him completely. After all, Clayton was a close family friend, someone she had known her entire life. He had always been a figure of authority and comfort in her world. Without hesitation, she followed him, stepping into the office she had seen countless times before, unaware that everything was about to change. And Monique took a seat by the window, watching as Clayton settled into his chair across from her. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the artifacts and photographs that adorned the shelves, mementos from a long career in law enforcement. Framed commendations and keepsakes from old cases filled the space, each item steeped in memories of a life devoted to justice. The room, much like Clayton himself, radiated authority and experience. And Monique admired the space with quiet wonder, unaware of the storm of thoughts brewing in Clayton's mind. He tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, to remind himself that this was just another conversation, just another day at the office. But as he sat across from her, something inside him stirred, refusing to be quieted. She wasn't just a visitor anymore. She was a young woman sitting within arm's reach, someone who, for the first time in years, made him feel something unexpected. He tried to focus on the conversation, turning to a topic that had always been safe: school. It was an easy conversation, familiar territory. And Monique, comfortable in his presence, responded eagerly, speaking about her classes, her friends, and the future she envisioned for herself. "I've been thinking about going into law enforcement," she said, her voice bright with excitement. "Maybe as a detective, or even the Secret Service. Something that matters." Clayton listened closely, his attention fully on her now. There was a fire in her words, an ambition that reminded him of his own younger days. In that moment, he saw an opportunity, an opening to guide her, to position himself as someone who could help shape her future. The idea came to him almost instinctively, a chance to extend their conversations beyond the office, to make sure these moments didn't end here. "You know," Clayton said slowly, his voice measured, "I have some friends in those agencies. I could put in a good word for you. Maybe even help you get some hands-on experience." And Monique's face lit up at the offer. "Really? You'd do that for me?" He smiled, playing the part of the mentor she believed him to be. "Of course, but there's a lot to learn before you get there. It's not an easy path, and you'll need to work hard if you want to succeed. I can help you prepare." His voice was calm, filled with nothing but genuine kindness. And Monique, eager to succeed, accepted the offer without hesitation. She didn't question his motives. Why would she? To her, Clayton was someone she had known her entire life. He was a man she trusted implicitly, a father figure of sorts, and the idea that he might help her get ahead in her career was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. Clayton leaned back in his chair, satisfied with how easily the conversation had flowed. He had planted the seeds for future encounters, for a relationship that could extend beyond the confines of this office. He told himself this was harmless. He was only helping a young woman reach her goals. But deep down, he knew better. He knew that every word he had spoken, every promise he had made, was part of something much more complicated. As Monique sat across from him, excited about the opportunities ahead, Clayton allowed himself a moment to revel in the power he held, the power to shape her dreams, to guide her path. And if he chose, he could take these meetings further than she could ever imagine. A road of no return had been crossed, one that could never be undone. Opportunities often feel like lifelines, especially when they come from someone you trust. For Monique, Clayton's offer of mentorship felt like a step toward everything she had dreamed of, a rare chance to get ahead in a competitive field, guided by someone with experience, influence, and connections. But what Monique couldn't see, and what no one could, was how easily a dream could become a trap in the hands of the wrong person. Clayton's proposal was simple. A few private sessions, just the two of them, focused on preparing Monique for the world of national security. He framed it as career advice, a way to give her the edge she needed to succeed. At first, Monique felt nothing but gratitude. After all, how many young women her age got this kind of attention from someone in a position of power? Clayton assured her that his guidance would set her apart from the crowd, opening doors she hadn't even imagined yet. But Clayton was careful, too careful, with every word, every suggestion. He planted small doubts in Monique's mind, words that made her question her choices. At first, they seemed harmless, just bits of advice, pieces of wisdom meant to help her succeed. But as their meetings continued, those words began to carry a different weight. The lines between mentorship and something more began to blur, and Monique, wrapped up in the promise of a better future, didn't see it until it was too late. Clayton's influence over her grew with each passing conversation. What started as a simple offer to help her career took on a darker undertone, one Monique was too eager to recognize. After all, she was just a young woman trying to navigate her future. In her mind, Clayton was her guide, her mentor, her protector. But in the silence between their words, something else was taking shape, something Monique couldn't yet see. Clayton's warning seemed wise at the time, almost like a protective gesture. He told her to be cautious about who she shared their sessions with, suggesting that not everyone would understand her ambition. People might try to hold you back, he said, his tone serious. They'll tell you it's impossible. They'll say you're aiming too high. The fewer people know, the better. It's safer that way. At first, Monique didn't question it. After all, she'd heard similar doubts from others before, especially from people who didn't believe young women like her should aim too high. Clayton's warning felt like wisdom, like he was looking out for her. Why would she doubt him? He was a man with experience, someone she trusted implicitly. He had always been there for her family, especially her father. So, she accepted his advice without hesitation, convinced he was guiding her with her best interests at heart. The sessions began innocently enough. They discussed the challenges of law enforcement, the importance of resilience, and the skills Monique would need to thrive in high-pressure environments. At first, they met after school in Clayton's office, a space she was familiar with. But soon, their meetings moved to more private locations, with Clayton framing them as focused training sessions. Each time, he made Monique feel special, as if she was receiving something that no one else could offer her. Eager to impress and excited about the opportunities Clayton presented, she gave her all to these sessions, believing they were shaping her future. But slowly, the nature of these meetings began to shift. What started as professional guidance evolved into something more personal, more intimate. Clayton began asking her about her life outside of school, her fears, her hopes, her relationships. He blurred the line between mentor and confidant, weaving himself deeper into her life, one conversation at a time. At first, Monique didn't realize what was happening. She believed that Clayton, her mentor, was just interested in helping her. But with every passing day, the grip he had on her tightened. Clayton was patient and calculating. He didn't rush things. Instead, he let Monique come to him, allowed her to trust him completely. Every time she opened up, every time she leaned on him for advice, she grew more dependent on him. The meetings, which started as professional, now became an opportunity for Clayton to plant seeds of influence, leading her to believe that he was the only one who truly understood her. Monique, caught in the glow of his attention, didn't see it for what it was. She believed she was being guided, not manipulated. She believed Clayton was helping her, not grooming her. As time went on, the sessions stretched longer into the evenings. Clayton always had a reason to extend them, a critical piece of advice that couldn't wait, an important topic that they hadn't covered yet. The meetings were framed as necessary, essential steps toward her success. If you want to make it, he told her, you have to be willing to put in the extra effort. Monique, driven by ambition and the desire to please him, agreed without hesitation. She told herself these late nights were a small price to pay for the future Clayton was promising. But as the sessions continued, Monique found herself more attached to him, not just as a mentor, but as someone she trusted deeply. She started to depend on him in ways she couldn't explain. Clayton knew exactly what he was doing. He crafted his words carefully, making her believe that their time together was both a privilege and a secret. Some people won't see this for what it really is, he said. They'll think it's inappropriate. They'll try to come between us. They'll try to make you quit, to make you give up on your dream. But I know how far you can go, Monique. Don't let anyone take that away from you. Monique believed him. Why wouldn't she? He was the sheriff, her father's trusted friend, the man who had known her all her life. If he said their meetings were necessary, she believed him. If he said the secrecy was for her benefit, she trusted him. And so, she kept quiet. She told no one, not her father, not Ella, not even her closest friends, about the time she spent with Clayton. The late-night sessions became their own little world, a space where Monique felt both vulnerable and powerful. Clayton made her feel important, capable of great things. The more time they spent together, the more she relied on him, not just for career guidance, but for emotional support. He became her protector, the one person who seemed to understand her in ways no one else did. But Clayton's mentorship wasn't just about her future. It was about something selfish. He made sure that Monique needed him, not just for her career, but for her sense of self-worth. With every passing week, Monique found herself more drawn to him, more dependent on his approval. She wasn't just learning from him. She was falling under his spell, and she couldn't see it for what it was. The dynamic between Clayton and Monique shifted completely over time. What started as simple case file reviews and discussions about real-world decision-making soon became something more intimate. One afternoon, as they sat together in his office, discussing the complexities of law enforcement, Clayton's hand lingered on her shoulder just a moment too long. Monique didn't pull away. She didn't even know that she should. It felt like a natural extension of the closeness they had been building over the months. Clayton, sensing her acceptance, took it as permission to go further. Then, without warning, the first kiss came. But it didn't feel forced or out of place. It felt inevitable, as though it was a step they had been inching toward all along. Caught in the moment, Monique didn't question it. She had grown used to following Clayton's lead, trusting his guidance. If this was part of their connection, then she welcomed it. That night, the line between mentor and lover completely disappeared. What followed was no longer a simple mentor-mentee relationship. It was an affair, hidden behind the same veil of secrecy that Clayton had so carefully woven around them. Their meetings continued, but now there was a new intensity to them, a dangerous combination of passion and control that left Monique feeling both exhilarated and vulnerable. She was falling deeper and deeper, believing that what they shared was something real. To Monique, Clayton wasn't just a mentor anymore. He had become her guide, her protector, and her everything. But what she didn't realize was that Clayton's control over her wasn't just emotional. It was absolute. He had inserted himself into every corner of her life, and with each passing day, she depended on him more and more. As their affair deepened, the walls surrounding them grew higher. They locked Monique into a world she didn't even realize had been built on manipulation and deceit. There was no turning back now. Clayton had her exactly where he wanted her, completely under his control and hopelessly in love. Secrets have a way of creeping into the small spaces of life, shifting everything just slightly out of place. At first, the changes in Monique's behavior were subtle, hardly noticeable. But as time went on, the weight of those hidden truths began to show. Her affair with Clayton had become the center of her world, where once she had been open, bubbly, and connected with those closest to her, she now began to pull away. Slowly but surely, the Monique everyone knew started to slip into the shadows. Calls from friends went unanswered. Hangouts with Ella became fewer and farther apart. Conversations with her father, Jerome, grew shorter by the day. Where Monique used to share everything with him, the small victories, the daily frustrations, she now offered him nothing more than one-word answers and excuses. Jerome began to feel the distance growing between them, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly why. He had always been close to Monique. Their bond was special, something most fathers could only envy. But now, every attempt to connect seemed to be met with resistance. She's always busy, always tired, always distracted, Jerome thought to himself. He tried to brush it off at first, telling himself that teenagers go through phases, especially with the stress of school and the pressure of thinking about her future. But as the days turned into weeks and the distance grew, it became harder for him to ignore. Something was wrong. There was a shift in Monique's demeanor. She seemed distant, not herself. The Monique he knew didn't keep secrets, but now it felt as if she was carrying something heavy, something she wasn't willing to share. Jerome wasn't the type to let things slide for long. One evening, he found his chance to confront her. Monique had come home late, her expression distant, as though her mind were somewhere far away. Jerome waited until she was in the kitchen, putting her things down. Then he stepped in, his tone steady but concerned. "Monique," he said, his voice calm. "We need to talk." Monique looked up, a flicker of guilt crossing her face before she masked it with a smile. "What's up, Dad?" she asked, her voice casual, but Jerome could hear the tension beneath it. "I've noticed you've been distant lately," he said carefully. "You're not around as much. You're not talking to me like you used to. What's going on?" For a moment, Monique seemed caught off guard, as though she hadn't expected him to notice. But then, she quickly recovered, offering him a soft smile. The guilt in her eyes remained hidden behind a facade of calm, but Jerome wasn't fooled. He could feel the distance growing, the wall that Monique had built between them. He just needed to know why. But Monique wasn't ready to share the truth. The wall she had built, both around herself and around her secret, were thick, and for now, she wasn't ready to let them crumble. The conversation hung in the air, unspoken words and unshared truths swirling between them. She smiled again, but this time it was forced, the edges of her expression tight. "It's nothing, Dad. Just school. A lot on my plate," Monique said, her voice a little too upbeat. Jerome wasn't convinced. Something was off. No matter how hard she tried to act normal, he could feel the growing distance between them. He pressed her gently, trying not to push too hard, asking if there was anything on her mind, anything she needed to talk about, something that might be bothering her. But Monique had learned from Clayton how to dodge these questions, how to deflect, how to steer the conversation away from dangerous territory without raising too much suspicion. "I'm fine," she insisted, her voice overly cheerful. "Really, Dad? You don't have to worry about me." Jerome wanted to believe her. He wanted to take her words at face value, but a knot of unease settled in his gut, one that he couldn't quite shake. Meanwhile, Clayton was carefully managing his own changes. Sharon, his wife, had started to sense that something wasn't quite right. After years of marriage, she knew Clayton better than anyone, and lately, there had been small signs, things that didn't add up. He had always been a man of routine, steady, predictable, reliable. But now, there were moments when he seemed distant, distracted, his mind clearly somewhere else entirely. He came home later than usual, offering vague explanations about long shifts or unexpected meetings. When he was home, there was a restlessness about him, a quiet unease that Sharon hadn't seen before. She asked him about it, of course, small, subtle questions, not wanting to seem accusatory. "Everything okay at work?" she would ask as they sat down for dinner. "You seem a little off lately. Is something bothering you?" Clayton was ready for the questions. He knew how to lie without making it obvious, how to offer just enough truth to satisfy her without giving anything away. "It's just work," he would say, his tone light, but not too light. "You know how things get this time of year." Sharon, though still unsettled, would let it go, for a while at least. But the nagging feeling didn't go away. She noticed the small things, how he checked his phone more often, how he seemed unusually guarded about where he was going or what he was doing. There were nights when he came to bed long after she had fallen asleep and mornings when he left the house earlier than usual, always with an excuse at the ready. Sharon told herself she was probably overthinking things. Clayton was the sheriff, after all. His job came with its fair share of stress and responsibility. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just about work. Something had changed, and she couldn't figure out what it was. The tension in the Marshall household was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but it grew with each passing day. Like a splinter buried beneath the skin, small enough to ignore, but impossible to forget. Clayton, however, was careful. Careful never to let the cracks show too much. Careful to keep the walls of his double life intact. He knew how to say the right things, how to offer just enough affection to keep suspicion at bay. To Sharon, he was still the man she had married, just a little more tired, a little more preoccupied. To his daughters, he was still their father, just a bit more distant than usual. But Clayton knew the truth. He knew that the walls were slowly closing in, no matter how carefully he managed things. The weight of his secret was beginning to take its toll. Monique, too, was feeling the strain. She missed the simplicity of her old life. She missed the ease with which she could talk to her father. She missed the carefree laughter she used to share with Ella. But every time she thought about stepping back, about pulling away from Clayton, she felt the invisible chains tighten around her. He had become more than just a mentor, more than just a lover. He had become the center of her world. Even as she felt the distance growing between herself and the people she loved, she told herself it was worth it. Clayton had promised her a future. He had made her believe that what they shared was special. She couldn't walk away now, not when she had already come so far. And so, she stayed, even as the life she once knew seemed to slip further and further away. In the meantime, Clayton continued to play his role, holding his family together, managing the balance between his public duties and his hidden affair. He knew he was walking a dangerous line, but the power he held over Monique and the hold he had on her life made it all worth it in his mind. Monique's love and trust were his tools to maintain control, and he wasn't about to let them slip away. But secrets, no matter how tightly they're held, always have a way of coming to light. And when the cracks in Clayton's carefully constructed world began to show, there would be no turning back for any of them. The distance between Monique and her father, between Clayton and his wife, and between who they once were and who they had become was growing. The cracks were small at first, subtle, barely noticeable, but with time, they threatened to widen and shatter everything. The moment of truth, the moment they had both feared but never thought would come, was drawing nearer. Secrets, no matter how well hidden, have a way of unraveling when least expected. What begins quietly, tucked away in stolen moments, can grow into something too big to ignore. And for Clayton and Monique, the moment they dreaded, the moment that would reveal everything, was finally here. Monique had known something was wrong for a few weeks. At first, she brushed it off, convincing herself that it was stress, exhaustion, or simply a phase. But as the days passed, the signs became impossible to ignore. The nausea in the mornings, the sudden, inexplicable fatigue, the gnawing feeling that something within her had changed. Eventually, she bought a pregnancy test, hoping against hope that it was all in her mind. But when the two lines appeared, confirming her worst fear, the world beneath her feet seemed to shift. She stared at the test in disbelief, her heart racing as 1,000 thoughts flooded her mind. She wasn't prepared for this. She hadn't planned for this. And yet, there it was, the undeniable proof that her life had taken a turn she never saw coming. She sat there in silence, her thoughts spinning. The weight of the realization pressed down on her chest, heavy and suffocating. In that stillness, one thought stood out clearly above all the others. She had to tell Clayton. He had promised to help her build a future. He had promised to be there for her. If anyone could help her navigate this, it would be him, wouldn't it? When Monique finally gathered the courage to speak, it was during one of their late-night meetings. They were sitting together in his office, the air thick with the usual mix of tension and intimacy. She knew that once she said the words, nothing would ever be the same. There would be no turning back. "Clayton," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need to tell you something." He glanced at her, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it?" he asked, leaning in slightly, bracing himself for whatever was coming. Monique hesitated for a moment, her hands trembling slightly. Then, without second-guessing herself, she said it. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Clayton stared at her, his expression frozen in disbelief. The words hung in the air like a ticking bomb, each second stretching into an eternity. Panic hit him like a tidal wave. His mind raced through the implications, what this meant for his career, his family, his reputation. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was now hanging by a thread. If anyone found out, the town, his wife, his daughters, the department, his life would be over. Clayton felt the walls closing in around him. The weight of his double life, of the secret he had been so careful to protect, was suddenly crushing him from all sides. He needed a solution, something quick, something final. This couldn't get out. It wouldn't get out. "We can't do this," he said, his voice sharp, almost panicked. "This can't happen. No one can know." Monique stared at him, confusion and hurt flickering across her face. "What do you mean? We can figure this out. You promised you'd always be there for me." Clayton ran a hand through his hair, his mind spinning. He couldn't afford this scandal. He couldn't afford the fallout. In his panic, one thought emerged. There was still time to fix this. There was still time to make it all go away. He leaned in, his voice low and urgent. "You need to get rid of it, Monique. We have to end this before it's too late." Monique's heart sank. Disbelief washed over her as the weight of his words hit her. She had come to him for support, for reassurance, but instead, she was met with fear and rejection. "You're asking me to have an abortion?" she whispered, her voice cracking with the emotional strain. Clayton nodded, desperation etched across his face. "It's the only way," he insisted. "If anyone finds out, my wife, your father, everything, it will be ruined. We can't let that happen. Please, Monique, you have to do this." But Monique shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. The realization that Clayton, someone she trusted so deeply, could ask this of her felt like a betrayal of everything they had built together. She could feel the cold grip of fear and manipulation tightening around her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being used. "No," Monique said firmly, her voice unwavering. "I won't do that. This is our child, Clayton. You told me we were in this together. You promised." For the first time, Clayton realized the full extent of the fantasy he had woven around her. She had believed him. She truly thought their relationship was real, that they had a future together. In that moment, the weight of his manipulation hit him hard. It wasn't just that she was carrying his child. She was carrying all the promises he had made, all the lies he had fed her to keep her close. Panic gripped Clayton, deepening with every passing second. He tried to reason with her, to make her see the danger they were in. "You don't understand," he pleaded, his voice raw with urgency. "If this gets out, my career is over. My family, my life, everything will be destroyed. We can't let that happen, Monique. You have to do this." But Monique was resolute. Her face, streaked with tears, was a picture of determination. She shook her head, her voice steady, despite the flood of emotion. "I won't do it," she said softly but firmly. "I won't get rid of it. This is my child, and I won't let you make me feel ashamed for wanting to keep it." Clayton felt the ground beneath him slipping away. His grip on the situation was unraveling with every word she spoke. For years, he had built his life on maintaining control over his career, his family, his relationships, and now, in the face of Monique's quiet defiance, that control was slipping through his fingers like sand. For the first time in his life, Clayton Marshall, the man everyone saw as steady, composed, and in control, felt completely powerless, and the terror of that feeling consumed him. He tried again, his voice breaking under the weight of desperation. "Please, Monique," he whispered. "If you care about me, if you care about what we have, you'll do this. You'll end it before it's too late." Monique's resolve didn't waver. She looked him squarely in the eye, her voice unwavering. "No," she said simply. "I'm keeping it." In that moment, Clayton understood something he hadn't fully grasped before. The life he had so carefully constructed, the life he had fought so hard to protect, was now on the brink of collapse. There was no going back. The truth was out, and no matter how hard Clayton tried to control the narrative, the consequences of his choices were closing in. The question wasn't whether the truth would come to light, but how much damage it would leave in its wake. There comes a point where fear consumes everything. Logic fades, morality crumbles, and all that remains is the instinct to survive, no matter the cost. For Clayton, that moment had arrived. With every passing day, the walls of his carefully curated life were closing in. The truth loomed over him like a shadow, waiting to swallow him whole. The pregnancy was a threat Clayton couldn't escape. No amount of lies or persuasion had worked. Monique had made it clear she wasn't going to terminate the pregnancy, and with that decision, Clayton's world tilted on its axis. His career, his marriage, his reputation. Everything was now on the brink of collapse. If the truth came out, there would be no redemption, no way to fix the wreckage it would leave behind. He spent restless nights staring at the ceiling, calculating every possible outcome. Each scenario led to the same conclusion: scandal, disgrace, ruin. His name would be dragged through the mud. The sheriff's office would crumble under the weight of public outrage. His wife, Sharon, would leave him. His daughters would disown him. And the town that had once respected him would turn against him with fury. He saw no way out, no way to contain the damage. But then a thought crept into his mind, a thought that should have horrified him, but instead brought a twisted sense of clarity. There was one way, one final way, to ensure the truth never saw the light of day. He told himself it was the only solution, the only way to protect everything he had worked for. He knew it was wrong, knew that crossing this line would be a point of no return, but in his mind, the choice wasn't between right and wrong anymore. It was between survival and destruction. The plan took shape slowly, lurking in the dark corners of his mind. If Monique was gone, if she simply disappeared, no one would ever know. There would be questions, of course, but questions could be managed. He was the sheriff, after all. The people would listen to him. He could make it go away. And so, in that moment, Clayton made a decision that would forever alter the course of his life and everyone around him. There was no turning back now. Clayton had always prided himself on his ability to control situations, to manipulate the course of events to suit his needs. As sheriff, he had experience in guiding investigations, steering them away from inconvenient truths. This was no different. He could make Monique's disappearance look like her own doing, ensuring no one would connect the dots. He knew how to cover his tracks, and he was confident no one would ever uncover the truth. He waited, patient, until the time felt right. He reached out to Monique with a calm, reassuring tone, inviting her to a quiet dinner. He framed it as an opportunity for the two of them to talk about the future, to plan for the baby, and to figure out how they would navigate the situation together. Monique, despite everything, still believed in him. She wanted to believe they could make it work, and that Clayton would stand by her, as he had promised. Monique arrived at the secluded location, a small cabin on the outskirts of town, far from prying eyes. Clayton greeted her with his usual, familiar smile, the comforting presence that had always drawn her in. He had prepared everything meticulously, a quiet dinner for two, wine poured into delicate glasses, and a warm fire crackling in the hearth. As they sat down for dinner, the conversation flowed easily. Clayton spoke reassuringly, telling her everything she wanted to hear, that they would figure things out, that they could still build a future together, and that everything would be okay. For a brief moment, Monique allowed herself to believe him. She let her guard down, feeling the familiar pull of the man she thought she knew. But Clayton's mind wasn't truly on their conversation. His thoughts were on the small vial hidden in his pocket, containing a drug that would ensure Monique never told a soul. He waited for the right moment. As Monique continued speaking, distracted by the conversation, Clayton reached for a glass, offering to top it off. With practiced ease, he poured the wine, all the while keeping his other hand steady as he palmed the vial. The moment came effortlessly. He tilted the bottle just enough to let the vial's contents slip in her glass, undetected. No stirring, no swirling. The drug dissolved seamlessly, hidden within the rich red of the wine. With a casual smile, Clayton handed her the glass. "This should help us relax a little," he said smoothly, watching as Monique, trusting and unaware, took a sip, then another. The conversation continued, but didn't take long for the drug to take effect. Monique's eyelids grew heavy. Her words began to slur as she tried to follow the conversation. A wave of confusion washed over her, and she looked at Clayton with a frown, as though trying to make sense of the sudden exhaustion overtaking her. "I don't feel so good," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Clayton reached out, resting his hand on hers in a false gesture of comfort. "It's okay," he said softly, his voice laced with feigned concern. "You just need a rest. Everything's going to be fine." Monique's body grew limp, her head lolling to the side as the drug dragged her into unconsciousness. Clayton watched her carefully, ensuring the drug had taken its full effect. When he was satisfied, he moved with calculated precision to the next phase of his plan. He carried her, unconscious and vulnerable, to his truck, her limp form cradled in his arms. The memory of carrying her as a baby briefly flickered in his mind, but quickly dissipated. This time, there was no joy, no pride, only cold determination. Clayton drove in silence, the road stretching out before him like an endless path toward the outcome he had chosen. The weight of what he was doing pressed on him with every mile, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Once he had crossed the line, there was no turning back. There was only one way forward, and he was committed to seeing it through. He had chosen the location carefully, a remote area deep in the woods, far from any trail or road. It was a place where secrets could stay buried, where no one would ever stumble upon the scene by accident. The drive felt endless, but Clayton kept his focus. He had made his decision, and now it was too late to back out. When he reached the clearing, he parked the truck and stepped out. He looked around, scanning the surroundings with a cold, calculating gaze. The trees loomed darkly around him, the silence of the forest pressing in. The weight of his actions hung in the air, but Clayton felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. He had done what was necessary. The forest was eerily quiet, the trees standing like silent witnesses to the darkness unfolding. Clayton made sure they were alone, the isolation of the place making it feel even more sinister. He opened the truck door and gently lifted Monique's limp body from the passenger seat. Her unconscious form was unresponsive, a reminder of how thoroughly he had manipulated the situation. As he carried her deeper into the woods, the only sound was the crunch of leaves under his boots. In this remote, forgotten place, Clayton did what he had convinced himself was necessary. Kneeling beside her, his hands trembled slightly as he placed them over her mouth and nose. Monique stirred briefly, her body reacting instinctively to the pressure, but the drug had taken too strong a hold. Within moments, the struggle stopped, and the forest fell silent once more. Clayton remained kneeling, his hands still pressed against her lifeless face. His breath came in ragged gasps, the weight of what he had done slowly pressing on his chest. As if moving on autopilot, he began to dig. He worked quickly, the dirt flying from his hands as he created a shallow grave. Time seemed to blur as he dug, the reality of his actions sinking in with each handful of dirt, but he didn't stop. He couldn't afford to stop. Not now. When the grave was finished, he laid Monique's body inside and covered her with the cold, damp earth. Just like that, she was gone, buried beneath the weight of lies and betrayal. Clayton stood over the grave, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The night was still, the forest holding its breath as if waiting to see what he would do next. But there was nothing left to do. He had made his choice, and now there was only silence. Without a word, Clayton turned and made his way back to the truck. There was no trace left of what had transpired. The forest would keep his secret, and with it, the life he had so desperately tried to protect. But secrets, no matter how deeply buried, rarely stay hidden. In a small, close-knit town, the disappearance of one of its own sends shockwaves through every corner of the community. People rally together. Neighbors exchange worried glances, and families cling tighter to each other, hoping the nightmare will never reach their doorstep. This time, the missing person wasn't just anyone. This was Monique Ellis, the daughter of a beloved officer, a girl everyone knew and adored. The day Monique didn't come home, panic began to spread. Her parents, Jerome and Denise Ellis, first thought she was just running late. But as time passed with no word from Monique, the feeling of something being terribly wrong set in. Jerome called her phone. No answer. He reached out to her friends. None of them had seen her. The hours ticked by, and the fear grew, a cold wave crashing over them. Jerome, a father's instincts kicking in, knew something was off. Monique wasn't the type to vanish without a word, without letting someone know where she was. The sun set on the first day without her, and Jerome did the only thing he could. He filed a missing persons report. The sheriff's office sprung into action, or so it seemed. Leading the search was none other than Clayton Marshall, the man who had every reason to ensure Monique never surfaced. Clayton wore the mask of professionalism perfectly, his voice steady, his demeanor calm, as he promised the community he would do everything in his power to bring Monique home. But every step Clayton took was carefully calculated. Every lead, every search, every word he spoke was done with one goal in mind: to keep the truth buried along with Monique. The search began immediately, with deputies canvassing the town, questioning anyone who might have seen her. Clayton was present at every turn, making sure the efforts appeared genuine. Teams scoured parks, abandoned buildings, and back roads. He barked orders, comforted volunteers, and seemed to be going above and beyond in the search for the missing girl. To everyone else, he looked like a man determined to find her. But in reality, Clayton was always 2 steps ahead, steering the investigation away from the one place they would never think to look: the remote spot where Monique's body lay hidden beneath the cold earth. Jerome, desperate for answers, leaned heavily on Clayton, his longtime friend and mentor. Clayton played the role perfectly, offering words of comfort and support, his arm draped around Jerome's shoulders as they combed through the possibilities. "We'll find her," Clayton reassured, his voice steady, but with an edge of concern that only made his performance more convincing. "Jerome," Clayton said, his voice calm and reassuring, "I promise you, we'll bring her home." He repeated this promise over and over, each time Clayton could see Jerome's hope flicker and wane. But every time that doubt crept in, Clayton was there to steady him. He stayed close to the Ellis family, visiting their home often, sitting at their kitchen table, and holding Denise's hand while she wept. In the chaos of their grief, Clayton became their lifeline, the one person they could rely on when everything else seemed to be falling apart. That was exactly how Clayton wanted it. His control over the investigation was meticulous. He carefully guided the search, steering deputies and volunteers toward false leads that would keep the truth hidden. He suggested that Monique might have left town on her own, perhaps overwhelmed by the pressures of school and life. He planted the idea that she could be staying with a friend who hadn't come forward, or that she might have been picked up by someone she knew. These theories planted seeds of doubt, redirecting the search down meaningless paths that led nowhere. Clayton knew how to manipulate the emotions of those around him, playing the role of the concerned sheriff while subtly pushing the investigation further from the truth. Every time the search teams got close to a place where Clayton feared they might uncover something, he conveniently found a new lead to divert attention. A new sighting needed to be checked out on the other side of town, or a tip that required immediate attention elsewhere. He kept everyone moving, always one step behind where they needed to be, ensuring that no one ever came close to the grave where Monique's body rested. Meanwhile, Monique's parents clung to every word Clayton said. They trusted him completely, believing that he was doing everything in his power to bring their daughter home. Jerome, in particular, relied on Clayton more than anyone else. As a father and an officer, he felt helpless in the face of his daughter's disappearance. But with Clayton leading the charge, he held on to a glimmer of hope. A belief that if anyone could bring Monique back, it was the man he had trusted for so many years. Clayton knew exactly how to manipulate that trust. He used it to keep Jerome close while keeping the truth hidden. He made sure to involve Jerome in every step of the investigation, giving him just enough responsibility to make him feel involved, but never enough to uncover the truth. When Jerome's frustration boiled over, Clayton was always there to absorb it. He allowed Jerome to vent his anger without raising suspicion. "I should have been there," Jerome said, his voice thick with guilt and grief. "I should have protected her." Clayton would shake his head, his expression solemn. "This isn't your fault, Jerome. We'll find her. I promise you, we'll find her." It was the perfect manipulation, a delicate balance of comfort and control, of empathy and deceit. Clayton gave the Ellis family just enough hope to keep them going, just enough reassurance to prevent them from looking too closely at the gaps in the investigation. Days turned into weeks, and still, there was no sign of Monique. The community grew restless. Rumors began spreading like wildfire. Theories whispered in hushed tones. Some believed Monique had run away, while others feared something much worse. But through it all, Clayton remained a steady presence. He was the man everyone looked to for answers. Behind the scenes, however, the weight of his actions was beginning to take its toll. Each day the investigation dragged on was a reminder of the terrible truth Clayton was hiding. Though he wore the mask of a concerned sheriff, there were moments when cracks began to show. Moments when the guilt gnawed at the edges of his mind, threatening to unravel the carefully constructed lie he had built. But Clayton couldn't afford to falter. The moment he slipped, the moment he let his guard down, everything would come crashing down around him. So he kept moving. He kept directing the search. He kept feeding Jerome and Denise just enough hope to keep them from giving up. Clayton knew that time was on his side. The longer the search went on without results, the more people would begin to believe that Monique was gone for good. If the investigation dragged on long enough, it would be easier to write her off as another unsolved case. And Clayton, with every passing day, felt the walls closing in on him, but he couldn't stop. Not now. The weight of his actions might eventually crush him, but for the moment, he had to keep up the facade. He had to keep everyone from discovering the horrifying truth buried just beneath the surface. Eventually, the hope Clayton clung to was that everything would fade into the background. Just another unsolved case, another tragedy with no answers. That was his dream, for the search to lose momentum, for the town to move on, and for his dark secret to remain buried, untouched by prying eyes. But secrets have a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply they are hidden. As the days passed, the pressure on Clayton grew, heavier with each passing moment. The cracks in his carefully constructed world began to widen, threatening to unravel everything he had worked so hard to control. The investigation, which he had meticulously steered and contained, was slipping beyond his grasp. The harder Clayton tried to keep it contained, the more fragile it became. Still, for now, he managed to maintain control barely. He kept the investigation alive, just enough to maintain appearances. He kept Jerome close, ensuring that the grief-stricken father would look no further. The truth was buried under layers of lies, false leads, and distraction. But Clayton knew, deep down, that his fragile charade couldn't last forever. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and when it came to light, it would tear through everything in its path. Time has a way of dulling memories and softening the sharp edges of grief, but not for everyone. 5 months after Monique's disappearance, the town had started to settle back into its routine, as life often does after tragedy. People moved on, though her absence lingered in quiet moments, and her name remained on the lips of those who still hoped for answers. The hope was slowly fading. It was becoming just another cold case, one of those unsolved mysteries that leave behind more questions than answers. The search parties had slowed. The missing persons posters on storefronts had begun to peel, forgotten by all except the most desperate. The constant buzz of speculation had quieted to mere murmurs. It seemed, at least to some, that Monique had simply vanished, swallowed by the silence of the night. Clayton Marshall believed, with time, the truth would remain buried, just as Monique had. But as it often does in stories like these, the truth began to surface unexpectedly and from the most unlikely place. It wasn't hackers or investigators who would uncover the first cracks in Clayton's web of lies. It was 2 ordinary hikers, out for what should have been a peaceful day on the trails. They had no idea that what lay ahead would unravel a mystery that had haunted the town for months. The hikers, a couple in their late 20s, ventured deep into a forested area rarely visited by anyone other than wildlife enthusiasts. The trail was rough and winding, twisting through dense woods where silence reigned, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves. It was the kind of place where no one would expect to find anything but nature, certainly not a hidden secret. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows along the trail, they noticed something strange, an unnatural disturbance in the ground, just off the path. A patch of earth, uneven and slightly sunken, stood out from the rest of the forest floor. The hikers exchanged uneasy glances. It could have been nothing, maybe a buried animal, but something about it felt wrong. Their curiosity got the better of them, and with hesitant steps, they approached the disturbed ground. One of them knelt down to inspect it more closely and noticed something chilling, a corner of fabric barely visible beneath the dirt and fallen leaves. It wasn't much, but it was enough to send a shiver down their spines. They knew better than to disturb the sight any further. Instead, they marked the location with their GPS and quickly made their way back to the nearest ranger station, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The rangers, alerted by the hikers' discovery, contacted local authorities. Within hours, a full investigative team was on site. What they uncovered beneath the disturbed ground confirmed the hikers' worst fears. Monique Ellis's body, wrapped carefully in a tarp, lay in a shallow grave. The news spread through the town like wildfire, quickly becoming the subject of every conversation. The moment the body was identified, the once tranquil community was shaken to its core. The mystery of Monique's disappearance, once thought to be fading into obscurity, was now thrust into the spotlight. And the man who had promised to find her, the man who had been guiding the investigation with calculated precision, found himself staring into the abyss of his own making. The truth, buried for so long, had finally come to light. And with it came the devastation that Clayton had tried so desperately to avoid. Now, as the truth began to unravel, Clayton's world teetered on the edge of collapse. His carefully controlled lies, once so effective, could no longer shield him from the consequences of his actions. The town, the family he had deceived, and the people he had once trusted were all closing in. There was no escaping the truth now, only the fallout from the secrets he had so carefully guarded. The shallow grave where Monique's remains were found told a silent and heartbreaking tale of betrayal and violence. However, the discovery didn't just reveal the location of her body. It opened up a floodgate of new questions. How had Monique ended up there? More importantly, who had put her there? As the forensic team worked diligently at the scene, law enforcement officers combed the surrounding area for additional clues. It was among the dirt and foliage that they uncovered the first undeniable piece of evidence: a small vial, half buried in the earth, bearing the faint imprint of a fingerprint. At first glance, it seemed insignificant, a trivial find in the larger scheme of things. But as the investigation progressed, this seemingly small clue would prove to be pivotal. With Monique's body recovered, the case that had long grown cold suddenly reignited. Detectives quickly took over the investigation, determined to uncover the truth behind her disappearance. They scrutinized every detail, including the GPS data from Monique's phone, tracing her movements from the night she vanished. What they uncovered began to peel away the carefully constructed lies that Clayton had woven around himself. The data revealed a troubling pattern. Monique's phone had pinged from several locations far from where Clayton had claimed she was last seen. Among these locations was a remote gas station just outside of town. At first glance, it seemed like an unimportant stop, but as the investigation deepened, it became a crucial piece of evidence. When the detectives obtained the surveillance footage from the gas station, the full extent of Clayton's deception came into focus. The grainy video, recorded on the night Monique disappeared, showed Clayton's truck pulling into the parking lot. His face was tense, his eyes scanning the area, as if he was checking for any unwanted attention. In the passenger seat, slumped and unmoving, was Monique. Her head rested against the window, her body limp. Clayton exited the vehicle and looked around the lot, clearly checking for anyone who might notice them. He went inside the station briefly, reappearing moments later. Before getting back into the driver's seat, he cast one last glance at Monique's lifeless form. Then, with one more look over his shoulder, he drove off into the night, the truck disappearing from view. Until then, no one in the town had known where Clayton had been that night, but the video was damning. Not only did it place him with Monique on the night she vanished, but it also showed her in a vulnerable, unconscious state, with a man sworn to protect her at her side. The footage raised immediate questions. Why had Clayton never mentioned being with Monique that night? Why had he failed to report their encounter in his official statements? And, most importantly, what had happened after they left the gas station? With Monique's movements traced to the burial site and the surveillance footage linking Clayton to her final hours, the detectives knew they were closing in on the truth. But they needed more than mere suspicion. They needed hard, irrefutable evidence. The key to unlocking that evidence lay in the digital breadcrumbs Monique's phone had left behind. The GPS data from Clayton's truck, retrieved from the truck's onboard tracking system, provided the final piece of the puzzle. The logs confirmed what the surveillance footage had suggested. Clayton's truck had traveled from the gas station to the remote area where Monique's body was found. This matched the exact location marked by the hikers who had discovered the body, revealing every turn, every stop Clayton had made. It painted a chilling picture of premeditation and a carefully orchestrated cover-up. It was a trail Clayton had never expected anyone to follow. But despite his best efforts to conceal his actions, the truth had found a way to surface. First through the hikers on the trail, and then through the relentless work of investigators determined to uncover the lies that Clayton had buried. The discovery of Monique's body was not just the end of a search. It was the beginning of justice. The hikers, unaware of the storm their quiet walk in the woods would unleash, had unknowingly uncovered the secret Clayton Marshall had buried, both literally and figuratively. As the investigation gained momentum, Clayton's web of lies began to unravel. The more the detectives dug, the closer they came to exposing the full extent of his crimes. Clayton, once so confident in his ability to control the narrative, now found himself at the center of a storm he couldn't escape. The truth, like the earth that had concealed Monique's body, had come to light. And now, there was no going back. The truth about Clayton's betrayal spread like wildfire throughout the town, tearing apart the carefully constructed facade of respectability he had so meticulously built over the years. As the evidence piled up, the community began to understand the full extent of his deception and the devastating price Monique had paid for his abuse of power. The hiker's discovery on that remote trail would mark the turning point in a case that had long since gone cold. The storm that was about to hit was inevitable, and one thing became crystal clear: no secret, no matter how deeply buried, could remain hidden forever. The sharp click of the handcuffs echoed through the still office as they snapped tight around his wrists, cold metal digging into his skin. Clayton remained silent, all fight drained from him as the weight of his actions settled in like a heavy stone pressing against his chest. There was no more running, no more lies. The truth had finally caught up to him, and there was no place left for him to hide. The agents led him out of the office, passing by the deputies who had once admired and respected him, passing by the desks where he had once commanded authority. But now, they looked at him not as their sheriff, but as the man who had betrayed everything the badge had stood for. Whispers followed him down the hallway, the weight of their judgment pressing heavily on his shoulders. As the agents escorted Clayton to the waiting car, the sun rose high in the sky, casting harsh, unforgiving light on the day of reckoning. The truth, once buried beneath layers of lies and manipulation, had finally risen to the surface. And with it, Clayton Marshall's life, as he had known it, was over. The man who had dedicated his life to serving justice now found himself bound by the very system he had once controlled, a prisoner of his own sins. And as the car doors slammed shut, the message was clear: no one, not even the sheriff, is above the law. Grief, in and of itself, is unbearable. But when the full extent of a tragedy comes to light, it brings a pain few can put into words. When the detectives recovered Monique Ellis's body, the nightmare deepened with every revelation that followed. It wasn't just the betrayal of trust, the horrific murder, or the loss of a young life that shattered her family's world. It was the autopsy, which unveiled the devastating truth that broke what little remained of their hope. The forensic team confirmed that Monique had been in the early stages of pregnancy. The child she had carried, Clayton Marshall's child, had been growing inside her when her life was violently taken. That discovery shattered Jerome and Denise Ellis even more profoundly. They weren't just mourning the loss of their daughter. They were mourning the grandchild they would never get to meet. The grief now carried an added layer, one of betrayal, violation, and unspoken dreams. Jerome could barely comprehend the news. His hands shook when the detectives informed him about the pregnancy. It was more than he could bear. The knowledge that his daughter had been carrying a child only to have her life extinguished by a man he had trusted, a man who had sat at his kitchen table offering comfort while they searched for Monique, was unbearable. The weight of that betrayal pressed down on Jerome's chest, suffocating him with guilt he could not shake. How had he missed the signs? How could he have stood by Clayton, searching for his daughter, while the man responsible led them further from the truth? The pregnancy, too, was a cruel shock. Jerome had no idea that Monique had even been in a relationship, let alone involved with someone like Clayton. It was too much. The layers of betrayal kept peeling back, each revelation leaving him raw and exposed. Denise Ellis, already buried under the weight of her grief, fell into complete despair when the autopsy results were revealed. The child Monique had carried would have been her first grandchild, a new beginning, a reason for hope. And now, both Monique and the unborn child were gone, buried together beneath a blanket of lies and deception. There were no words that could ease the pain of such a loss. Every dream Denise had for her daughter's future was gone, wiped away in the cruelest of ways. Monique's pregnancy spread quickly throughout the town, turning an already horrific crime into something even more unthinkable. Clayton Marshall wasn't just a murderer. He was a predator. He had taken so much, her life, the future she had hoped for, and the life of an innocent child, and he had done it all under the guise of someone who was meant to protect. The truth had finally emerged, and the consequences of his actions would ripple through the lives of those he had hurt for years to come. Clayton Marshall had once been seen as the protector of his community, a man of authority who served with pride and integrity. But that image had shattered beyond repair. The truth revealed that he had exploited his position of power, manipulated a young girl, and taken 2 lives just to cover his tracks. The man who had been entrusted to safeguard his town now stood as a symbol of everything they despised. As the truth unfolded, protests erupted outside the sheriff's office and the courthouse, the cries for justice reverberating through the streets. Signs demanding accountability for Monique and her unborn child waved in the air, and the calls for Clayton's conviction grew louder with every passing day. The community, once proud of its sheriff, now viewed him as a monster dressed in a uniform. Every kind gesture, every accolade he had received, now felt like an insult to the evil he had hidden behind his badge. Within the Marshall household, the revelations were equally devastating. Sharon Marshall, Clayton's wife, sat in stunned silence as the news spread, each new detail crashing down upon her like a heavy weight. She had been blindsided by the affair, shattered by the horrific murder, but the discovery that Clayton had fathered a child with Monique, the same girl they had watched grow up, was the final blow. It was a truth she couldn't grasp. Sharon thought back to every moment they had shared, every day Clayton had spent with their daughters, knowing that he had been hiding this unspeakable secret all along. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the knowledge that Clayton had fathered a child with Monique, a girl who had been like a second daughter to her. The sheer cruelty of it left Sharon speechless. Ella Marshall, Clayton's youngest daughter and Monique's best friend, was left shattered by the news. For weeks, Ella had mourned Monique, struggling to understand how her father could have been involved in such a monstrous crime. But when she learned about the pregnancy, it was too much to bear. Monique had been carrying her half-sibling, and now both were gone, victims of the very man Ella had once trusted with her life. The betrayal cut so deep that Ella didn't know how to process it. She withdrew into herself, shutting the world out, refusing to speak to her father, unwilling to acknowledge his existence. Every memory she had cherished, every moment spent with him, now felt tainted by the horrific reality of what he had done. Ella felt as if her entire life had been built on lies, and the weight of that realization crushed her. Harper, Clayton's older daughter, responded with rage. She had always been closer to her father, looking up to him as a role model. But when she discovered the truth about his crimes, everything she had once admired about him crumbled. The pregnancy revelation was the final straw. Harper packed her things and left the family home, cutting all ties with her father. She couldn't forgive him for destroying the lives of those she had grown up with, and for the pain he had caused their family. The Marshall household, once filled with laughter and routine, had turned into a battleground. Sharon tried to hold her daughters together, but the damage Clayton had done was beyond repair. Their family was broken, shattered by the weight of his betrayal. In the quiet moments, when the world seemed still, Sharon sat alone, grappling with the reality that the man she had loved for decades was capable of such monstrous acts. The community's anger burned hotter with each passing day. Monique had been one of their own, bright, ambitious, and full of potential, and now she and her unborn child were gone, victims of a man they had once trusted. The demand for justice became relentless. The people wanted to see Clayton punished, not just for the death of Monique, but for the life of the child she had carried. They wanted to make sure he would never have the chance to hurt anyone again. For Jerome and Denise Ellis, the support of the community offered some comfort, but it was still cold. The loss of their daughter and grandchild had left an irreplaceable void in their hearts. They attended every court hearing, sitting in the front row, determined to see Clayton face the consequences of his actions. But even a conviction couldn't bring Monique back. Even seeing Clayton in handcuffs couldn't heal the wounds he had inflicted on their family. What had begun as Clayton's manipulation had grown into something much larger, a tragedy of betrayal, loss, and broken trust. The community would never forget what had happened, and neither would the families involved. Clayton Marshall's name would forever be linked to pain and suffering, to the lives he had destroyed in order to protect his own lies. And as the trial continued, the full weight of his actions would come to light, and there would be no escaping the consequences. The town braced itself for the final chapter, a reckoning long overdue for Monique, her unborn child, and for all those whose lives had been shattered by the man they once called sheriff. The trial of Clayton Marshall became the focal point of both the community and the nation, drawing everyone into the dark story of betrayal, manipulation, and murder. Reporters filled the courtroom, and cameras stood outside like vultures, ready to capture every moment of the sheriff's downfall. This was not just a trial. It was a reckoning that demanded every ugly truth be exposed for the world to see. From the very beginning, the prosecution wasted no time in laying out their case, presenting a narrative of manipulation that revealed Clayton's true nature, a man who had exploited his authority and preyed on someone who trusted him. Every move he made, the prosecution argued, was calculated, from the start of the affair to the cold-blooded murder that followed. They painted Clayton as a man who had used his badge as a shield to hide his darkest impulses. Piece by piece, the prosecutors reconstructed the events leading to Monique's death, using surveillance footage, phone records, and forensic evidence to paint a damning picture. They revealed how Clayton had manipulated Monique, convincing her to meet with him under the guise of mentorship, luring her to a remote location, drugging her, and ultimately killing her to protect his reputation and career. The courtroom fell silent as the prosecutors described Clayton's actions. Each word felt like a hammer striking at the very foundations of trust, and each piece of evidence served as a reminder of the man Clayton had pretended to be and the monster he had become beneath the surface. Then came the emotional testimonies, and with them, the heart of the trial was laid bare. Monique's parents, Jerome and Denise Ellis, were the first to take the stand. There was no hiding the grief etched deeply into their faces, nor the immense pain they carried as they spoke about the daughter they had lost. Jerome's voice cracked as he recalled the first day Clayton had joined the search for Monique, standing beside him as a trusted friend. "He looked me in the eye," Jerome said, struggling to hold back tears. "He told me we'd find her, and the whole time, he knew exactly where she was." His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. The weight of the betrayal was too much to bear. Denise's testimony was equally devastating. She spoke of the dreams Monique had for her future, the plans she had shared late at night over cups of tea. "She wanted to make a difference," Denise whispered, her voice trembling. She wanted to work for the detectives, to protect people. And instead, the man we trusted, our friend, stole her future and buried it in the ground. Her words hung in the air, filled with the sorrow of a mother who would never see her daughter grow into the woman she was meant to become. As the trial continued, the courtroom was filled with palpable tension. Every testimony, every exhibit presented brought the harsh truth into sharper focus. But the most shocking testimony came from Clayton's own family. Sharon Marshall, his wife, took the stand with a heavy heart. Her voice was steady but filled with disbelief. "I don't know who my husband is anymore," she admitted. "The man I married, the father of my children, wasn't capable of this. Or at least, I thought he wasn't." She spoke about the months of lies, the late nights when Clayton returned home with excuses that now felt like insults. "I believed him," she said quietly. "I believed every word. And now I have to live with the fact that I was married to a man I never really knew." Her words landed with the weight of 1,000 betrayals. A wife forced to confront the darkest truth about the man she had shared her life with. Ella Marshall, Clayton's youngest daughter, gave perhaps the most painful testimony of the trial. As she sat in the witness chair, tears streaming down her face, she spoke about the friendship she had shared with Monique. Ella recalled how Monique had been like a sister to her, how they had laughed, cried, and grown up together. But now, with her father's actions exposed for the world to see, that relationship was shattered beyond repair. For Ella, the weight of the betrayal was overwhelming. Her father, the man she had always trusted, was the one who had taken her best friend's life. The girl who had once been a part of their family was now gone, and her father was responsible for it. Ella felt as though her entire world had been turned upside down, and the grief of losing Monique was compounded by the horrific realization that her father was the man who had caused that loss. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as the devastating truths were revealed, one after the other. The facade Clayton had so carefully constructed was crumbling, and in its place, the horrifying reality of his crimes emerged. The town watched as the man they had once respected was torn apart by the weight of his own lies. The trial wasn't just about Monique anymore. It was about the loss of innocence, the breaking of trust, and the collapse of everything that once seemed certain. For the Ellis family, there would never be closure, not truly. Monique was gone, and nothing could bring her back. But at least the truth was finally out, and the man responsible would pay the price for the destruction he had caused. As the trial neared its end, the entire community felt the heavy burden of the pain and loss. And with that, the final chapter of this dark tale began to unfold. The trial continued with the truth laid bare, and the weight of Clayton's betrayal became undeniable. Ella's voice broke the silence, raw with grief. "She was my best friend," Ella said, trembling. "She was like a sister to me. And my father took her away from me." The words hung in the air as the courtroom absorbed the depth of her pain. The prosecution pressed on, painting a picture of a man who had not only violated the trust of the badge he wore, but had also destroyed 2 families in the process. They revealed the lengths to which Clayton had gone to maintain control over his life, his manipulation of Monique, and the lies he had told his own family. It was now Clayton's turn to face the relentless questioning. The room grew still as he took the stand. The weight of his actions pressed down on him from all sides. He had denied the affair at first, clinging to the hope that he might escape the consequences. But as the evidence piled up, it became clear there was no escape. Under the prosecution's sharp questions, his defenses crumbled, and the calm authority he had once carried faded, revealing the man beneath. The man consumed by fear, regret, and guilt. The prosecutor asked the first question, cutting through the air, "Did you have an affair with Monique?" His voice was steady, unwavering. Clayton hesitated. The weight of the truth crushed him, suffocating him. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. For a moment, he struggled against the confession, but eventually his shoulders sagged under the overwhelming burden. "Yes," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I did." The confession sent a ripple through the courtroom. Clayton's family sat frozen, unable to believe what they had just heard. Meanwhile, Monique's parents, Jerome and Denise, clutched each other, their grief far too powerful to contain. But the prosecutor wasn't finished yet. He pressed forward, forcing Clayton to confront the full extent of his actions. "And did you kill her?" the prosecutor asked, leaning in, his voice like steel. "Did you take her life to protect your secret?" Clayton's composure shattered. His hands trembled as he buried his face in them, overwhelmed by the weight of his guilt. "Yes," he choked out, his voice breaking. "I killed her. I didn't know what else to do." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Clayton's confession hung in the air like a dark cloud, suffocating the room. The sobs that escaped him echoed through the courtroom, a man broken by his own sins. There were no more lies to tell, no more masks to hide behind. Clayton Marshall, the man once revered as the sheriff, had admitted to the unthinkable. Though the trial was far from over, the truth had finally surfaced. Clayton's confession marked the beginning of the end, an end that would bring justice for Monique and her unborn child, and some form of closure for the families whose lives had been destroyed. As the gavel struck, signaling the close of the day's proceedings, one thing was certain. Clayton Marshall's fate had been sealed, and he could not escape the consequences of his actions. The courtroom grew silent, heavy with the weight of justice about to be delivered. Clayton Marshall stood, shackled before the judge. His shoulders were hunched under the crushing weight of his guilt, but no chains or bars could truly reflect the enormity of the lives lost at his hands. The life of Monique Ellis and the unborn child she carried. This moment was not just the sentencing of a man, but the reckoning for two lives stolen far too soon. The judge cleared his throat, his face solemn as he addressed the courtroom. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of the community's sorrow. It held the devastation of two grieving families and the shame of a betrayal from a man once entrusted with power and responsibility. "There will be no easy way to deliver this sentence," the judge began, "for no words can ever fully capture the harm you have inflicted." He paused, ensuring the gravity of the moment settled over everyone in the room. "Mr. Marshall, you have not only committed a grievous crime, but you have also caused irreparable damage to the lives of those you were sworn to protect. You betrayed a young woman who trusted you, exploited her vulnerability under the guise of mentorship, and in doing so, you took advantage of your authority in the most despicable way imaginable." The courtroom was still. The judge's gaze remained fixed on Clayton as he continued. "Monique Ellis came to you seeking guidance, trusting you, believing in you. You destroyed that trust, shattered her life, and took away not just her future, but the future of the child she carried." Clayton stood silently, unable to meet the eyes of the families and community members who had once believed in him. His world had collapsed. The truth was undeniable, and the consequences irrevocable. The courtroom was heavy with the weight of truth as the judge's words echoed through the room, shattering the silence. "Monique Ellis was not only a victim of your manipulation, Mr. Marshall," he began, his voice steady yet filled with solemnity. "She was a young woman with dreams, ambitions, and a future ahead of her, one that included the unborn child she carried." Gasps rippled through the gallery as the full scope of Clayton's actions began to sink in once again. The child Monique had carried was not just a symbol of hope for her future, but a life that would never see the light of day, its potential silenced because of Clayton's desperate need to cover his tracks. The weight of this revelation settled over everyone in the room, a somber reminder of the two lives lost. The judge paused, giving the room a moment to absorb the gravity of his words. "The child growing inside Monique was your child, Mr. Marshall," he continued. "You knew that the revelation of this would destroy your career, your reputation, and your family. But in a moment of selfishness and cowardice, you chose to end two lives to protect yourself. This choice reflects the depths of your betrayal, not just to Monique, but to your own unborn child." Jerome and Denise Ellis, Monique's parents, sat in the gallery, their faces etched with the unbearable pain of their loss. Their grief was compounded by the knowledge that the grandchild they would never meet had been taken from them by a man they had once trusted. The words from the judge only deepened their suffering. The reality of the double loss pressed heavily on them, and their hearts broke as they silently mourned both Monique and the child she had carried. Sharon Marshall, sitting on the opposite side, clutched her hands tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. She sat motionless, as though the sheer force of her grip could prevent herself from shattering completely. Clayton's daughters, Ella and Harper, sat in stunned silence, unable to process the weight of the revelations that had torn their family apart. Monique's unborn child, once a potential sibling, had been taken by the very man they had once trusted. It was a truth too painful to fully grasp. The judge's voice remained unwavering, though his expression betrayed a deep disappointment. The badge you wore, Mr. Marshall, was meant to symbolize integrity, responsibility, and protection. Instead, you wielded it as a shield to hide your darkest impulses. You manipulated, you betrayed, and you destroyed. This court cannot undo the harm you have caused, nor can it restore the lives you took. But it can ensure that you will never again harm another soul. The tension in the room thickened as the judge delivered the sentence. This court finds you guilty of first-degree murder, abuse of authority, and gross misconduct. In light of the severity of these crimes, and the fact that your actions resulted in the deaths of both Monique Ellis and your unborn child, I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, reverberating throughout the courtroom. The sound echoed like the final judgment. Clayton Marshall's fate was sealed. He would spend the remainder of his days behind bars, haunted by the lives he had stolen. The gallery sat in stunned silence as the weight of the sentence settled in. Jerome and Denise clung to each other, their grief far too overwhelming for words. The knowledge of the innocent life, Monique's child, taken from them would never fade. That life would never have a name, never have a chance to grow, and the weight of this loss would remain with them forever. The hurt was too deep, too profound to ever truly heal. On the other side of the courtroom, Sharon lowered her head, unable to reconcile the man she had once loved with the monster now being led away in chains. Her heart shattered for her daughters, Ella and Harper, who sat frozen, caught in the turmoil of confusion and sorrow. The truth they had learned through this trial had been too much to bear, and the emotional burden was too heavy for them to process. The life they had known had been a lie, shattered by the brutal reality of their father's actions. As Clayton was escorted from the courtroom, the weight of the community's disappointment pressed down on him. They had trusted him. He had been their protector, their sheriff, the very man they had relied upon. And yet, he had shattered their trust in the most profound and unforgivable way. His sentence was a measure of justice, but it could never undo the damage he had caused. Monique and her child were gone, and no amount of justice could bring them back. As the courtroom emptied, the judge's final words hung in the air, a chilling reminder of the consequences of betrayal. "Let this serve as a reminder," he said, his voice firm, "that power is not a privilege. It is a responsibility. And when that responsibility is betrayed, there are consequences. No one is above the law." The sound of the judge's gavel still echoed in the silence as Clayton's fate was sealed, leaving the courtroom and the families to confront the irreparable damage caused by one man's abuse of power. The trial of Clayton Marshall would forever be remembered, not just as the story of one man's fall from grace, but as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the critical need for accountability. It was a stark reminder that authority means nothing without integrity, and that no betrayal, no matter how deeply buried, will stay hidden forever. With Clayton sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the community was left to pick up the pieces. Justice had been served, but the pain, the loss, remained a haunting reminder of lives taken too soon and trust that could never be restored. Even after the trial ended and Clayton Marshall was locked away, the scars he left behind continued to fester, lingering like a shadow over the community. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes. Monique's death was more than just a tragedy. It was a reckoning that forced everyone to confront the reality of betrayal hidden behind power and trust. And in the wake of such devastation, Healing was slow and uneven, but it had to begin somewhere. For Jerome and Denise Ellis, the loss of their daughter was a wound that would never fully heal. Some days, the grief felt unbearable, the silence left in Monique's absence too loud to ignore. But they refused to let her memory be defined solely by tragedy. Determined to create something meaningful from their pain, they founded the Monique Ellis Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping young women who had suffered abuse at the hands of those in power. The foundation became a beacon of hope, providing legal aid, counseling, and mentorship for survivors of abuse. What started as a local initiative quickly gained national attention. The Ellis family traveled across the country, speaking at schools and community centers, sharing their story to help prevent other families from experiencing the same nightmare they had endured. For Jerome and Denise, the foundation was a way to honor their daughter's memory and protect others from the dangers Monique had faced. In doing so, they transformed their profound loss into a powerful force for good. But healing takes many forms, and not all of it was visible to the public. Sharon Marshall and her daughters, Ella and Harper, quietly packed their lives into boxes and left town, hoping to escape the scandal that had consumed their family. The weight of Clayton's betrayal was too great to bear in the community they had once called home. Every street, every familiar face, was a reminder of the devastating truth. Sharon chose a new town, far from the headlines, a place where she and her daughters could try to rebuild their lives. For Ella and Harper, moving away provided a chance to heal, but it also meant confronting the painful reality of who their father was. It would take years before they could fully process the events, before they could separate their memories of the man they had once loved from the monster he became. Their journey toward healing would be long and complicated, but it was a step they were ready to take together, supporting each other as they navigated the challenges ahead. Back in town, the community struggled to rebuild. Trust, once freely given, became harder to come by. The sheriff's office underwent a complete overhaul, with new leadership determined to restore the public's faith. Policies were rewritten, safeguards put in place, and mandatory ethics and accountability training became standard practice. The town knew that it would take more than just new policies to rebuild trust, but they were willing to try. Local schools and community groups partnered with the Ellis Foundation to create programs aimed at educating young people about the dangers of manipulation and the abuse of power. These programs became a vital part of the town's identity, a painful lesson learned the hard way, but one they were determined not to forget. Monique's story was shared openly, not as a scar, but as a reminder of the importance of speaking up, of holding those in power accountable. Though there were still moments of anger and frustration, the wound Clayton had left behind would take years to heal, and some would never fully recover. Slowly, however, the community began to find ways to move forward. They knew that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering and learning, becoming stronger and wiser through the pain. The journey was difficult, but it had begun, and the town was committed to walking it together. In the end, the memory of Monique Ellis, her life, and the lessons learned from her tragic story would live on, guiding the town toward a future where betrayal, manipulation, and abuse of power were no longer accepted. It was a hard road ahead, but with each step, the town grew stronger, and Monique's legacy became a powerful reminder of the need for justice, integrity, and the protection of the most vulnerable among us. As the town slowly began to rebuild, one question lingered in the air, haunting every family, every officer, and every person who had followed the case. How do we protect ourselves from those sworn to protect us? Clayton Marshall had worn a badge, had sworn an oath to serve and protect, yet he had used that very badge to manipulate, betray, and destroy. His story was not just one of personal failure. It was a warning, a reminder that power, when in the wrong hands, can be deadly. The question now wasn't only about justice for Monique. It was about preventing the next betrayal before it could happen. But Clayton's case is not the only one of its kind. There are countless others, other abuses of power, other betrayals hidden behind authority, waiting to be uncovered. Stories of manipulation, exploitation, and control that demand to be told. These stories remind us why accountability is vital and why we must never stop questioning those in power. So, we leave you with this question. What would you do if the person meant to protect you became the one you feared most? How do we guard against those who hide behind trust and authority? There are more stories to tell, more truths waiting to be revealed. Join us for the next chapter, where we uncover another shocking case of abuse of power, one that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Please subscribe and stay with us as we continue to expose stories of justice and accountability. The only way to prevent betrayal is to shine a light on the dark corners where it hides. This isn't the end, it's only the beginning.